Hello and welcome to another edition of Safe Communities. My name is Joe McDonald and I'm the Plymouth County Sheriff, and I'm very lucky today to have two very interesting guests with us today. To my immediate right, I've got Deputy Director Paul Souza of our Bureau of Criminal Investigation. He is a fingerprint expert and is going to talk a little about that. Paul, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Sheriff.
And to his right, we have one of Plymouth County's finest, Chief Rick Wall from the Pembroke Police Department. Chief Wall and I have worked together for many, many years in court in the role of prosecutor, both of us being prosecutors. That was an enjoyable time, I think, in both of our careers, but I'm really privileged and pleased to say that I get to work with Chief Wall on a regular basis still. So Chief, welcome, and thank you very much for joining us. It's great to have you. We were going to talk a little bit today about AFIS, the Automated Fingerprint Identification System that is featured prominently in many of those television police dramas. I don't really watch them myself, but I know when I walk through the room when my mother or my wife are watching them, AFIS comes on and they talk about, we're going to run this through AFIS, and you see a bunch of things flash on a screen and boom, all of a sudden we know who the person is.
Sure.
And although that isn't necessarily reality, I think we're getting a little closer to that now. We wanted to talk a little bit about the BCI, just so people know what BCI is. BCI is the Bureau of Criminal Investigation. It's been a part of the Sheriff's Office as long as I can remember, since long before I was there. I think it originated in the 1950s.
1950 by the Hannibal Police Chief. Everyone sees the CSI shows today, and they all assume that crime is just happening right now. They don't realize that crime's been happening for literally centuries, and going all the way back to 44 BC when Julius Caesar was stabbed to death. So we have on today CSI effect, and what we do when we process a crime scene, we're getting the evidence and we have to process it. And through AFIS, which you're correct, is the Automated Fingerprint Identification System, gives the computer a chance to work itself and work its magic so that it can take one fingerprint, run it through the system of known fingerprints, literally millions of fingerprints, and to find that one individual if they're in the system. We've never discovered two people to have the same fingerprint, so it's very reliable on the criminal side and the civil side.
Yeah, you know, it's funny, a lot of people, we talk about a lot of the technologies that we're using now in law enforcement, the facial recognition, the iris scans, the fingerprints, and you know, a lot of it is not necessarily new. No. You know, we think about the Bertillon measurements they used to do on people's faces, or the wanted posters that they used to have. The first photographic wanted posters were for right after the assassination of President Lincoln. They put those pictures out. But you must have seen vast dramatic changes as well, Rick, since you started.
In the 80s when I started, actually Paul and I have had kind of parallel careers. We've been working together a lot. The BCI would process the crime scenes. We had black and white photographs, and we had to take physical evidence, and then it went through that painstaking process of taking a fingerprint and figuring out each point that made it to identify it. One person with a magnifying glass picking out each individual point, and then having to compare those with cards of other fingerprints. I can't imagine the hours that was spent in order to put one fingerprint to one person. And everybody was done with ink and on cards. And then the cards went into a file, and the file was in a
right
in Hanson at the Sheriff's Department substation over there. And again, it was what a process to try and get things done. And then in the 90s, we got the AFIS system that was with the green light and being able to scan people directly into a computer, but it was a standalone where we had to download the information every month and bring it to another computer to compare it. And there was still the eyeball, one man, one pencil, right. one print check. And now we have the MorphoScan, which to me it's real time. You're putting fingerprints into a system and they're being checked against all of the systems that are online. Right. And you get a result back within a couple of minutes.
Yeah, so now, and as you correctly point out, all of the systems, so it's not just Plymouth County we're checking against, it's everywhere.
That's right, because we had individual departments that may do their own fingerprint work. You had the Sheriff's Department that did fingerprint work, you had the state doing their fingerprint work, you had the FBI, but none of them were together. They were all warehoused in different places.
And through this grant that we just received now, they're all linked together. there was like little islands of all kinds of departments. Chicago had theirs, LAPD had theirs, Miami-Dade, they had theirs, Plymouth County, we had ours, and they really weren't linked very well together. But now through the Morpho latest system that's out there today that we were able to obtain through the leadership of the sheriff, we now were able to interact with all these other agencies, and we're able to search within seconds the entire country for one individual. Whereas before we had the paper cards, like you said, Chief, and we could never, it would take forever to find one fingerprint.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's amazing. You talk about Morpho, and that's the brand name, correct?
Yes, sir.
Of what this is. It's the company that they went with back in the 90s, and you say it's due to the leadership of the sheriff, and it's not necessarily this sheriff who can take credit for that. It's, I believe it was Sheriff Peter Flynn back in those days. Sheriff Flynn had really a great vision for this and went with that Morpho system that's now gone nationwide. I'm very proud to say, and you can correct me if I have the stats wrong, but historically the BCI, the work that we're able to do with our local police departments here, identifying those latent prints, has resulted in more cases being solved here in Plymouth County than all the other 13 counties of Massachusetts combined.
I'm very proud of that too.
Yeah.
And that's our relationship with the local police departments. And we only go to a scene unless the chief and his department calls for us to respond to a scene. And it can be anything from a break and entry to a mal-damage to a sexual assault. We would go to virtually anything, but we don't automatically go. We've been around since 1950, and we have a very good working relationship with the local departments. So when they call, we haul, we process the crime scene, and then we take this data and put it into a system.
Yeah.
The beautiful thing now, and the leadership of the Sheriff's Department, through Peter Flynn all the way up till today, has been that we've had this excellent rapport. We don't fish on both sides of the bank. We don't do the interviews, we don't do the interrogations, we're not the first officer on the scene. We only support the local departments, and we assist them. And we're just the only group that's all we do.
Yeah.
We're focused on fingerprints or on forensics. Could be tire tracks or footwear impressions. I know the chief and I, we had a footwear case in Pembroke a long time during a snowstorm that we were able to figure out the guy from, I believe it was Cohasset, or
From Cohasset.
that we were able to solve a case for B&Es.
How'd you know it was Cohasset? They were Bruno Mali shoes?
Well,
or-
and again, one of the beauties of being involved with the Sheriff's Department and BCI particularly, where they outreach to all of our departments. And for people who don't know, when we arrest a prisoner, we bring him back to our station, an officer from Plymouth County comes up and does the fingerprint for us. But not only does it take care of that aspect, because there's a professionalism to do that. Not anybody is just qualified to do that and do it right. But that officer brings in the knowledge that he's been to 22 other towns and he knows what's going on, and there's a spreading of information. And when they process crime scenes, they're looking at, I've seen this before, I've seen segments of this before, and it gets tied together. And that's, Paul was working diligently for some other towns, and we were able to put the similarities together. So, the Sheriff's Department in Plymouth County has provided so much for the local departments, and I don't know if people realize that you're more than just a jail, and you've increased your services and your tenure tremendously. In departments like Pembroke, we wouldn't be able to afford to do the kind of police work we do without the support we get from the Sheriff's Department. So I want to thank you for that, and I hope, and I know it's going to continue, and I just see things moving forward. We're getting better at what we do, and we're getting more technologically advanced, and processing times are going down, arrest rates are going up.
Yeah.
Solvability is going up.
Yeah, all the way around. And you know what's nice in Plymouth County, and I really hope that it's like this in other places, are the personal relationships that we all have. Because you've worked with Paul for many, many years. You've worked with me for many years in many roles. And many of your officers, I know them personally, having worked cases with them when I was an assistant DA. And to see them to progress in their careers and flourish, knowing how great they are and how professional they are, the reason we don't fish both sides of that bank is because we don't have to.
Right.
And that's a testament to Pembroke PD and all the other PDs in Plymouth County really are so well led and so well staffed that's why we have the highest solve rate of any county in Massachusetts on these cases. And I'm thrilled to be part of that. It's been great.
And we greatly appreciate it too. But we all work together. That's the good thing today is the police departments,
Yeah.
the state, the FBI, even Interpol. If we need somebody, suppose somebody's from South America and we need a fingerprint card, we can call Interpol and we can get a fingerprint card today. We have a working relationship that's really national and international
Yeah.
today. But in Plymouth County, there's almost 500,000 people that live in this county, I believe, and we have this agency that we all work together and we're able to solve crime.
Yeah.
If you look at other states, even combining some New England states, we get more identifications out of our system than other New England states combined. And I think it's because of this type of a working relationship. And also reducing the level of crimes that BCI will respond to, too. Some people may say, oh, it's just a property crime. We're not going to respond to a property crime. Your house got broken into, or your gazing ball out in the field was taken. We're not going to respond to that. But BCI, if we get called, we will go and we will process it. And it's that same individual that's doing B&Es today that could be doing additional B&Es, bank robberies, and hopefully it will never hurt someone, injure someone. But because we nip it in the bud, and sometimes we get the same person that's done several crimes.
Yeah.
They go to court, they're into jail, then they get released, they're back to their old haunts again. The recidivism rate is kind of high. But because we can find them quickly, I think last year we identified over 300 individuals, which took these 300 people and put them into the system, either get some help
Right.
or figure what's going on
Right.
with them.
Yeah, and with a lot of the stuff that's going on now with the opiates and a lot of people who aren't in the system, who are now turning to a life of crime because of the drug addiction, they may not be in that system unless and until you pull a fingerprint or you guys pull a fingerprint at a crime scene in your town,
Right.
which when you analyze it comes up in 4 or 5 other towns. So you may have one ID that's going to get a lot of different individuals, and once they're booked inside the jail, now we know who they are.
Right. And the good thing about that is you're solving all this crime. Like you were just saying,
Yeah.
if we just have one department, Pembroke might have an incident, but so may Rockland, Brockton, Situate. There's actually was a group that was leaving the city, and they were going to the outskirts, and they were dropping off these people to join their gang, and they had to come back with a car. And so now the suburbs are being affected by inner city youths that in order to be initiated, they have to go and find a
Yeah.
vehicle and come back. We'll process that vehicle, and we'll hopefully get a latent fingerprint. And if they're in the system, we can make an identification.
Yeah.
And that'll prevent other people from losing their cars. And,
Yeah, and it's going to feel great for you, Chief, and for your guys, because you may break a case in Pembroke that breaks cases in 3 other towns.
Well, and we've found that working alone doesn't work well. Crime doesn't have borders, so crime solving shouldn't have borders either.
Yeah.
And we belong to several different task force, the old OCPAC, Old Colony Police Anti-Crime Task Force, and they're working on drug issues
Yeah.
and the break issues and everything else. But the kind of that ties everything together is that Plymouth County connection, and usually it goes through BCI because it's a repository for all of the information and all of the knowledge from all of the departments. And the BCI officers become ambassadors of that information as they go from place to place to place. And, we're constantly getting, this happened in Brockton and these people were involved, and, you just had a car break in Pembroke and it may be related. So it's just a great tool.
Wow.
It's helpful, Chief, us having that exchange of information too, where Pembroke might have a case or an incident, and we can all share this who belong to these task force and belong to these organizations. We can share this information. So sometimes the police may in Brockton, let's say, may have some individuals that they're keeping an eye out for, and all of a sudden you stop a motor vehicle, and there's the person that we've seen. Oh, we make an identification. But the good thing is with BCI, I'm glad what you said was ambassadors. We have some very talented people out on the road, and they're really rabid on finding fingerprints. That's all they care about is forensics, whether it be a tire track, a footwear, a bite mark, or whatever the case may be, and it works out very, very well. And I liked how you said how we all work together. I remember there was a restaurant in Pembroke that it was a terrible tragedy. They had closed at night,
Yeah.
and the manager or the cleaning crew or somebody was there.
It was the cook.
The cook,
Was still
okay,
there.
still there. And they got bound up in the basement. They took this individual down in the
It
basement.
was an armed robbery that happened.
And they tied this poor individual up. And he either got free after they left, but by BCI listening to the radio transmissions, there was a car that was discovered in Plymouth with an individual in it, and who had the money bag
Right.
back to this restaurant in Pembroke that was held up, an armed robbery.
Yep.
And we all worked together and made a good identification on that case, and we took an armed robber off the streets.
And what's really important too is the information travels not just through the department heads it's traveling at the lowest levels through the patrol offices, through the BCI offices, so that it's getting out to everybody, and it's information that the officers use immediately. I mean, and they're part of that system, so it isn't a bureaucratic exchange of information, which typically happens in a lot of, you know, in our agencies and everything else from the top down. But this is actually working from the bottom up, and information's getting directly to the hands where it needs to be processed, to be used.
Right. There's no one on the road today that wants to see crime continue.
Right.
I think everyone wants to neuter it. They want to figure out who did it. And even the victim, they get tunnel vision. This is my house. My pocketbook was stolen. My vehicle was broken into. We want to know who did it.
Yeah.
And it's almost instantaneous, like an instant message. My house was broken into. The police respond. They request PCI. Well, we go, and then like the homeowner standing there. Well, who did it?
Yeah.
So
You
it
know,
almost has to be
on
instantaneous.
TV, they get solved
Right, within an hour.
within an hour, and maybe because we don't have commercial breaks to do all that extra work that they do. But people expect that, and the technology now is catching up to what people are seeing on TV.
Yeah.
You know, to be a recipient of one of the new Morpho scans, freestanding live scan fingerprint units is, and I'm not a technological guy, I just got a cell phone a couple of years ago, but to be able to bring somebody in, whether it be a sex offender or a criminal or somebody for licensing, or the license to carries, and to be able just to go to the machine, have the fingerprints entered, and then they're sent out, you get your records checked back, and they're in there, they're processed, and it's done.
Yeah.
That's great.
And the next step that goes on, just to identify an individual, just by doing like even a 2-fingerprint search to find out who this person is. But we also capture that information, and we also scan it through all the latent fingerprints that we have on file. So every time someone that gets arrested today, they could have done a crime 10, 15 years ago, and we're going to identify, maybe the statute of limitations has expired, but at least we still know who that person is. And it could also be the same person that gets arrested for the first time, gets into the system, and he was the one that was doing B&Es over several towns, you know, over the past few years.
Well, so there's probably a lot of folks watching who are wondering, well, I wonder how that works. How does the AFIS system work?
The AFIS system operates on a, now this is for the students out there, learn your math, because in a geometric pattern that we all have in our fingerprints, each of us have 3 types of fingerprints, an arch, a loop, or a whorl, or maybe one that's really not identifiable, so we'll go with 4. But each one of these prints also has little minutia points. All of the ridges that you can see on your fingers, they all start, they stop, they diverge, and they might come back together again. So where any one of those events occur is considered a minutia point.
Yeah, and if you look
Now,
closely at your own fingers, you can see that.
you can see that. And then what the machine does, it makes a geometric pattern of that system, of that layout. And that creates a mathematical equation with all the 1s and 0s running all the way down. And it can scan millions of people, literally within seconds or minutes, to identify one person.
Yeah.
So if the person that has been in the system, either criminally or civilly, and we find a latent print at a scene, we can identify that person. And we can also eliminate people too. Sometimes people have a fingerprint that's in the system, but they were civilly there. They were supposed to be there. It could be, we dust a countertop at a bank robbery, we lift a latent fingerprint, it comes back to the teller.
Yeah.
So we obviously know the teller didn't hold up the bank, but we can eliminate people too. And that helps helps the police department identify who the person was, either good or bad.
You lift a latent print, and what do you do with it? You feed that into
What
the
happens
system?
is when an officer would go to the scene, they would use a couple different processes. One, the basic system is we use what's called fingerprint powder. It's basically black soot with some starches and some resins in it. We use a feather duster, and we try to enhance it. The latent may be invisible, but until we add these chemicals, it actually lifts it. Then we would photograph it. We'd photograph with a ruler, because we want to make sure it's the right size. We'd take some lifting tape, lift it, put it onto a backing board, and that will come into the system where we can actually scan it in and then search the entire system. We could also take a photograph right at the scene now and submit it as like a JPEG file, and getting it right into the system. So the service that we can provide today is light years away it was just 50 years ago, 25 years ago.
Well, it beats when you guys had to go through the card file.
Oh,
Well, it kind of looks like it. No, that doesn't look like it. But you get a result how quickly?
Within seconds. I'm a slow typer. when I was in the typing class in high school, I was only there because that's where all the girls were. So I made the terrible tragedy of really not, I'm like one of those guys that just pecks along, unfortunately. So the hardest thing for me to do today is to write the report. You can have a great arrest, you can have a great pursuit, you can capture someone, but for me, the hardest thing is writing a report. So the machine will do it within seconds. I'm sorry to say, Sheriff, it might take me a little longer to type it all in and then submit the report to you,
It's natural,
Chief.
it's to be expected.
But so that's the longest part.
But
is
when you
the
do get a
report
result, say you put it in and seconds later, do you get a one-to-one?
Would get a, well, you never get a rubber stamp. Unfortunately, because of depositional pressure, because of smudging or smearing, you're not going to get an identical print. You might have pieces of a latent fingerprint. You then have to match that up to the person. And then we use another process that we go through called ACE-V. So we analyze it, we'll compare it, we'll verify it, and we'll also have another examiner examine it as well, so that when it leaves our office, it's 100%.
Yeah.
We have never made in the history of BCI a false ident. The last thing you want to do is make the wrong person get arrested.
Yeah.
You don't want to take someone's freedoms away because they were found at a scene that they weren't there. Right. There's been a few cases, out of the millions of cases, there's been a handful. I'll confess to that some people made some errors in judgment.
Not here, though.
Never here, no sir. But what happens then is, you go on. Major agencies made some issues, but we correct them.
And just so the people understand, how is it that you would take a fingerprint and make an opinion, an expert opinion, as you do in court, that fingerprint came from that defendant in this courtroom? Because
of the shape, the flow of these ridges, the location of these minutia points, and then to see, because we've looked at, I've looked at hundreds of thousands of fingerprints, and I've never seen two that are alike. It's like one person finding two snowflakes that are alike. The individual has one fingerprint on each finger, and that's it. Right. We've never seen all the fingers in Nome, Alaska, and down in South America. So we've never seen everyone's fingerprints. But logically, we pretty much can say no two people have the same fingerprints, right. And we've never found it. We literally have millions of fingerprint records on.
But when you look at that, like points of comparison, explain that so that the audience would have an understanding.
Okay. Well, with these ridges, where they start and stop and they converge, that becomes one point. One area of a ridge event. And what we do is we then map that out, and then we see what's going on. Now, for demonstrative purposes, we could make a chart. And that way, then we blow it up so the jury can understand it too. Because we can talk about fingerprints if you're an examiner to another examiner. Because, it's an identification. Right. But to show it to a jury, you actually have to do a visual picture of what a chart looks like. And we usually use like 10. The mathematical equation that we use at BCI is 10 areas of interest that match. And if we don't have that, if we go a little bit lower, that's okay. And since 1974, they actually said you can only use one if you need to, because the shape of the pore, the shape of the ridge is different.
I was fortunate enough to take a one-week course with Director Foley on fingerprint, and the intention was to learn how to roll better prints so that we could do some of the civil things back at the station. And it turned out to be going through the entire booklet to get a basic knowledge of the different points, the deltas and the minutia. And I have to tell you, for people in the public, that you sit there and look at this point, and you have a little a pointer with a little fine edge on it and a magnifying glass, and you're looking at, once you determine if it's a whirl or a loop, and some of the other things, and then you have to start identifying these little individual pieces. It could be as small as just a little pore that you're looking at, and you're identifying this known to this unknown and trying to match them up in the same places and giving all numbers. And it's painstaking work, and it's incredibly tedious. And for the machine to be able to narrow it down to one print, and then you go through and confirm what the machine says visually, is taking the new science and the old trusted methods together.
And I think that's important. Thank you for bringing that point up. For people to understand that we're not simply feeding it into a machine and doing what the machine says.
Right.
There is always that control of an expert who's going to examine that fingerprint.
But what we're saving is the hundreds and thousands of card files individually looking through, and there's a process where they get numbers, and you can look at different patterns, so you can eliminate all of the whirls if you're looking at a loop. You don't have to look at those. And people have to understand, too, that you don't have one fingerprint for all of your fingers. You have 10 different ones.
Right.
And you have palm prints and edge prints, and all of these things now are being captured in the new machine.
And what
Yeah.
Chief Wall just mentioned too is it's hundreds of hours of training too. It's not like you just wake up one day and say, "Oh, I can tell the difference by a topography
Yeah.
map who's who."
Oh,
But just let people know what an arch, loop, and whirl looks like too. Is if you have an arch fingerprint, basically your ridges form from one side of your finger, they arc up, and they flow from the opposite side. And then a loop pattern is the ridges would flow in, loop around, and then come back in from the same side.
That's right.
And what Chief said was a whirl pattern is basically look at a concentric body, still body of water. You drop a rock in it, and you see those concentric circles. In a basic term, that would be a plane whirl. You have two deltas on either side, and you have the center area that would be like a whirl pattern. So the arch, the loop, and the whirl is three patterns. And
Yeah.
most prevalent is the loop pattern. About 65% of all of us have a loop pattern.
Yeah.
Very few
And
arches.
people can look at their fingers at home now and.
Oh,
and
sure.
figure
Yeah, they
it
can
out.
take like an ink pad and
Yeah.
just put their fingers on it, and then tap a piece of white
Yeah,
paper.
or
and
after you
see it.
wash your windows on the door and your children go up and put their hands in, that's exactly what you're looking at.
Yeah, we could use that at my house. We could figure out who was pushing on the windows.
Yeah, I think we can analyze who's been in
Yeah.
the cookie jar. Sure.
So, you know, also I think it's important to note that you've gone through a tremendous amount of training.
Literally hundreds of hours.
Yeah.
And also, even to become certified, you have to go through the training. And the process, you have to know the history of fingerprints, know about skin, you have to know about the comparison process, what the different types of pattern recognitions are. It's a long process. There's only a few thousand people in the world that can pass the
Right.
test.
But on top
pleased.
of the test, you have to do thousands of hours worth of comparisons that have
Right.
to be verified. So it's really,
Yeah.
when you have an expert, it's outstanding. But to have this machine be able to do a lot of that legwork first, and now you're verifying what that machine says.
Oh, it's an excellent tool. And I think the logarithm with the geometric pattern that Morpho's developed really leads a lot of other places. There's some other systems out there are very good.
Wow.
But when you start seeing like the FBI and Plymouth County and Mass State Police and other agencies all falling behind this logarithm, it's a good testament to what we have.
Well, I'm very glad now that we're going to the one single superior system statewide and nationally too, for that matter. So this is going to be a great thing. One thing, I know time is running a little bit short, but I do want the chief to tell me the story about the footprint, because that's interesting. The one that you had alluded to. You caught a guy by means of a footprint in the snow.
Yeah, and actually, we ended up capturing him on Easter Sunday, which kind of probably ruined his Easter dinner, but did a bunch of house breaks and right around Christmas time.
Right.
And there was different sole patterns from the footwear at every one of them. And so it's just a matter of now finding the foot. And through some, and working with some other agencies, because Cohasset had some similar things, we were able to capture the individual and confiscate his footwear, which was then processed, that put at the crime scene, and you know, and was a pair of $90 sneakers, and back in,
And we
at
kept
that
them,
time
right.
they were very expensive sneakers
Yes.
that we're not sure the origin of them. They may have been stolen too.
And
But,
time was of the essence, if I remember correctly. It had snowed, so the
That's
print
right.
was in snow, and you put a highway cone over it,
That's
so
right.
that you know, we would identify no one would step in it. And then when we got there, I took the cone off, we got some pictures. But at the same time, it was warming up. So if we didn't
Wow.
capture the print at the right time, the footwear impression, you know, the guy would still be running free. I think we might still have his sneakers too.
I
we
think
ever
so.
returned them.
I don't think we ever have. But yeah, in several other houses, there was partial footwear prints everywhere. No fingerprints, because apparently he was wearing gloves. So that's all we had. But again, it was interesting that there were other departments involved, that the information was shared through BCI. This is very similar to something we had, or I've seen that footwear pattern before, and it was all tied together.
Wow.
Thank you, Chief. Yeah, it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, that's a great story. Any other
Oh,
crazy
that's
little
good.
stories?
One of the interesting things, and we haven't talked about the civil aspect of this new machine,
Yeah.
but the database now is now a uniformed network. Instead of having all these, a criminal database and everything, firearms licensing, everybody that's coming in is getting put into the system, and it's not like Big Brother. And I look at it as, at some point, if you have somebody that can't remember with all the Alzheimer's that we
Sure.
deal with,
Yeah.
and they're in the system, we're going to be able to identify them just by putting two fingers into the system, if they've ever had a license
Wow.
to carry, if they've ever had a vendor license. And again, all the records checks are going to be verified through fingerprints, so there
Wow.
won't be a mistake in identity or.
Awesome.
There's a-
Well, I thank you guys for coming in. We could do a whole show on the civil side. Maybe we'll do that. But Chief Wall and Deputy Director Souza, thank you.
Thank you,
Two
Sheriff.
great professionals working hard here in Plymouth County fighting crime. I feel very safe knowing you guys are on the job, so I thank you for coming in.
Thank you, Sheriff. Glad to be here.
Appreciate it.